been musing on video blogging. It seems to me that when Steve Saunders began his Outernet video blog series, that the technology world he was describing was much less positive than the world that I envisioned. It's my belief that we are not passive victims of the future. We actually can, in part, control what that future will be and shape it into something more positive. Steve's videos were shot in New York City. In October 2009, I was in Nagarkot, Nepal, a place in which you can find a view of the panorama of the Himalayas, a very inspiring place. And I got the idea of shooting videos there that would be optimistic and would counter Steve's less than optimistic views. But unbeknownst to me, even as I was traveling there, Steve Saunders' videos were becoming more optimistic, a trend that has continued. It's almost as if there was a telepathic force through which he became aware of what we were up to in Nepal, and he began to feel more positive. And so it left us with the feeling that we had won the battle before we even had the debate. So what happens now? Well, in this series of video blogs, I'm going to take you through some ideas in my forthcoming book, Digitality, Human Experience in the Digital Age, which mixes autobiographical stories of my life with techno-futurism, the idea of the merger of humans and machines while maintaining the higher elements of the human spirit. It's a fun, engaging book that has benefits to all readers. And you'll just have to watch and see what happens. It's possible that Steve Saunders' views and mine will converge further and will appear to be speaking with one voice. I have the greatest respect for what he's created here. It's also possible that we will diverge again and become counterbalancing voices. So stay tuned and find out. Speaking to you about taking charge of our own destiny as we embrace the future of the internet and technology and medicine. You know that video blogging is in. InternetEvolution.com founder Steve Saunders has a video blog in which he points out that things are very worrisome on the internet. Looks like the internet is becoming divided, potentially upon ethnic and religious lines, and that CIA is supporting 40 internet startup companies that may ultimately determine what the internet is like in the future, and we may not like that. My own view is that there is a great deal that is positive that will come from the internet and technology, and the strong sense that we are passive victims of the future is not correct at all, that indeed we can control our own destiny. We can determine what the evolving relationship between computers and technology and us will be, and whether it is indeed a force for darkness or a force for light. I certainly don't see it as a horror movie. I see it as something that expands the capabilities of human beings, increases our potential, enables us to do things we were never able to do before. The internet is a part of that and raises great future possibilities for human beings. Reality is much more positive than that one gets an idea of in Steve Saunders' blog. There is a counter argument that needs to be heard, and what better place to tell you about that counter argument than here, the edge of the universe, at the other side of the world in Nagarkot, Nepal. When you look at the night sky and think about the telescopes we have now that are literally able to see to the beginning of time, and that time is getting earlier and earlier, you realize that technology and the internet are expanding both space and time for us, creating innumerable positive possibilities for human being activity, We can aspire to many things that we could never aspire to before. It enhances memory, it enhances our ability to make decisions, and it is not true that we're just passive victims of the future. We can determine what that future is, can take charge of our own destiny, and make the kind of positive future that we would like to see happen. In October 2009, I was in Nagarkot, Nepal. Come on. We need to start over, Ms. Bennett. Not only because of me, but also because of you. Nagarkot. Nagarkot.
I always want to keep it because it's funny.
We, the readers of InternetEvolution.com, may believe that we have highly specialized interests, that often those interests are not the same as those of the general public. But I've been noticing recently many mainstream magazines with titles that have nothing to do with the internet and technology, nevertheless have cover stories in those areas. For instance, the latest National Geographic has a cover story on merging man and machines, the bionic age. The latest Forbes has a cover story on Google wants to own your mind. And the latest Scientific American Mind has a cover story, social networks, what they do to you. So what's going on here? It suggests that the interests of InternetEvolution.com readers are actually becoming, can you believe it, mainstream. And it means that you and I, day by day, are becoming more and more normal. It's scary. So, one of the most overused phrases in technology writing in 2009 has been, science fiction becomes reality. Of course, this idea began a long time ago with Jules Verne and others, but recently we've been ascribing a certain kind of magic, certain special characteristics to science fiction writers who predict things that later happen and become technology reality. And what's interesting now in the writing we do right here on InternetEvolution.com is that we are, in a sense, a special brand of science fiction writers ourselves when we speculate about the future, and probably the writing that we do helps to determine what that future will be. This has been Kim Solez bringing you musings from the hinterland. You may have noticed that this past decade is getting sort of a bad rap in the press. A New York Times columnist has called it the Big Zero. Others have called it the Noughts, the Naughties, the Aughts. Nothing very positive. Odd, because for me the past 10 years have been quite positive. Maybe in this next year, 2010, things will turn around for the world. It's interesting to think about the movie 2010. It was produced in 1984. It was a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick film 2001, shot originally in 1968. In the 2010 movie, distractions are quite an important feature, and sentient beings on Jupiter's moon Europa create a second sun that so distracts world leaders on Earth that they wind down preparations for a nuclear war and decide to live in peace. Now that's quite a distraction. We may decry the continuous partial attention that's part of the digital age, but we also have positive distractions. When an attractive person walks by, you don't regret that distraction. I actually think that the past 10 years are not a washout at all, and that the next 10 years could be equally positive or more positive. And we might find a lot of fun distractions in the next year, 2010. One of those would be a complete rethinking of the internet, rethinking DNS, address tables, protocols for the internet, um, the whole shooting match there. It's all being rethought in a number of projects in the United States, and the idea is that in the next 10 years then, by the year 2020, we would have an internet that is completely secure, safe, very fast, with addresses for everyone, that is as benign and sunny as that world with two suns described in the movie 2010. This has been Kim Solez bringing you Tech Musings from the Hinterland. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's the way Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities begins. And it's a bit how I feel about the great elation and the deep sense of foreboding that I have about the idea of the AI physician. As a matter of fact, you can imagine that the Dr. Strangelove 20-second famous moments where his right hand and his left hand are competing with each other, trying to do each other in, that's kind of how I feel about this. Strong feelings on both sides, the positive and the negative. And I've asked to join me today Stephen O'Shashin, who's a young doctor working with me. Stephen, it's hard to imagine somebody being as incredibly old as 64, you know, it's amazing. How do you think, what will medicine be like when you're 64, with the idea of the advent of artificial intelligence and NATO technology and so on? Will it be better than today? Will it be scary and freaky? What will it be like when you're 64?
To start with, I'll be younger when I'm 64. Anyway, you know, artificial intelligence is wonderful, and I think it's going to be a tool that will help us then, and even from now on till then. The truth is this, you know, the human mind is so big, and the brain, and human brain and the connections are so big, so enormous that to map it out is not just going to be a day's job, and I'm sure it's going to take us a long time. But what this will do for us is to help medicine to a large extent. It will help us develop algorithms that will help us, you know, make diagnosis faster, and it will actually help the mind of a doctor to work faster, to put a doctor ahead of what we are now, and kind of give us an impetus to do more than what we're doing now. So our output will have been, will have increased. It will have increased, the delivery to our patients, and I'm sure, artificial intelligence is going to be a wonderful thing to help us, develop medicine in the near future.
So it probably will be positive in the short term, in part because AI cannot replace us fully. I mean, it can be adjunctive, it can add to what we're doing, but it'll be a long time before we're forced to stay home and the software is doing all the work, right? So it's not that much of a threat. And the other funny thing about it, though, is this idea of transmitting one's symptoms, how you're feeling bad, by cell phone. You can imagine people who are not sick at all, people with Munchausen's syndrome who are making up stuff. They might have a field day with this, right? That maybe, in fact, the first tests of this would be false diagnoses, false symptoms sent by people who are not sick at all, who are just a little crazy.
Yes, I agree with you. But at the same time, we should be positive. Today we have what we call lie detectors, and so I'm sure when this starts, is a good beginning. Over time, we can develop to a point where it will be able to detect those who are giving hysterical symptoms, those who are giving real symptoms. So I think. But for me, it's good to look into the future. That's the wonderful thing I like about this. The future, it looks brighter because when we start the challenge to develop, new things, how do we detect those who are real symptoms, who are not real symptoms? As the challenge comes in, we develop more and more. And I think maybe the goal should be to replace us, actually. But
someday, a long time from now, when we're way older than 64, right? Thanks. This has been Kim Solez and Stephen O'Shashin bringing you Tech Musings from the Hinterland. Hello, I really appreciate the insights in Nicole Ferraro's editor's blog about President Obama's speech, in which he says he doesn't know how to use his iPod. There are two mysteries that she leaves us with, and I'm here to reveal the answers to these mysteries. The first is, why doesn't President Obama know how to use his iPod? And that's easy. And the answer, which can also be the answer to some other things, is blame Canada. And as South Park says, why should you blame Canada here? Well, in January 2009, there was a Canada-wide CBC poll asking which 49 songs from north of the 49 parallel Barack Obama should have on his iPod. And Canada voted, and I'm sure he didn't know diplomatically what to do about that. The best thing to do is to say he doesn't know how to use his iPod. So that's the answer to the first mystery. The second mystery, what about multitasking? Can we do it or can't we? Because every study shows that we really can't do it, that we're less efficient when we multitask, and yet all studies show we're doing it more and more, and so his speech talks about distraction. Well, that gets to the work of Wim Veen, who published a book some years ago called Homo Sapiens. And zapping is this talent of multitasking, going from one task to another, back and forth, different streams, all in the same consciousness, and doing it successfully. And his book argues that people who grew up accessing the net 24/7 can do this. And most studies study older people who actually, their brains were finished growing before they started to use the net 24/7. So if you look at the people whose entire childhood was, immersion in the net 24/7, they are able to successfully multitask and do bricolage and all the other things that we talked about in our original digital intelligence essay in 2002 that was discussed here in 2008. So those are the answers to the two mysteries posed by Nicole's blog. Thought you'd like to know that. This has been Kim Solez bringing you Tech Musings from the Hinterland. Hello, I've been musing about spontaneity and the new meaning of on the road in the digital age. On the Road is the name of a famous book by Jack Kerouac that defined the Beat generation. It's got all these maps of where he went and all the cool things that happened to him. But those trips took planning and took many years actually to get the book published. It was a long process. And now, On the Road is something completely different. You can tonight get in your car without a plan, and with your connected devices, your iPad, iPhone, whatever you happen to have, figure out where you're going to go, where you're going to park, what you're going to do, what the time frame is, how you're going to get there. You can be completely spontaneous in a way that Jack Kerouac never could. And is that more fun? Well, it's surprising, it's interesting, but part of the pleasure of doing things is planning them and talking about the plans. And so being completely spontaneous lacks a bit of that. But it does show you the very great difference in the opportunities available to us today, where you may not have a clue what you're going to do tonight, and you can decide that when you're in the car, and the world of 1957, where being on the road was something completely different than what it is in 2010. This has been Kim Solez bringing you Tech Musings from the Hinterland.